Is God necessary being? In this video, we provide a chain of reasoning to show that God is necessary being. In a previous video, we provided reasoning to prove the existence of a first cause. We will briefly summarize that argument, and then go beyond that in this video. 1. Proof for the first cause. A. It is impossible to cross an infinity. Explanation. No matter how long you count from 1, 2, 3 onwards, you will never reach infinity. B. Therefore, there must be a first cause. Explanation. It is impossible to cross an infinite series of causes to get to us. Therefore, the chain of causation cannot be infinite. It must be finite. The first cause in that finite chain is the first cause. C. This first cause must be an ontologically self-sufficient entity. Explanation. An ontologically self-sufficient entity is the only kind of entity that does not depend on any prior cause for its existence. The first cause cannot depend on any prior cause for its existence. So, this reasoning establishes the existence of a first cause that is an ontologically self-sufficient being. D. In our previous video, we showed that the first cause must necessarily have the power and the ability to a. Cause, b. Create, c. Create time, d. Switch from timeless to timed states, e. Not require external causes, f. Not require external triggering of action, g. Internally choose or initiate or trigger its action. And so, the first cause must have volition and therefore be a mind. In philosophical theism, we call this mind, God. We move on now to discuss the question of whether God is necessary being. 2. Proof for necessary being. Based on the logic above, if something exists, there must necessarily be a first cause. We can call this a necessary being because it necessarily exists, if something exists. It is obvious that something exists, the universe, us. And therefore, the first cause necessarily exists. Therefore, in this sense, the first cause, God, is a necessary being. 3. What sort of necessary being? Necessity can be a. Empirical, b. Logical, or c. Conceptual. And so, we can have a. Empirically necessary being, b. Logically necessary being, c. Conceptually necessary being. 4. Empirically necessary being. Empirically, we find that we exist, and the universe exists. Therefore, there must necessarily be a first cause. This is empirical necessity. And this proves the existence of an empirically necessary being, first cause equals God. 5. Logically necessary being. Logic sequence 1. As we have seen above, if something exists, then logically there must necessarily be a first cause. So, this would be a logically necessary being, given that something, anything, exists. Einstein, for instance, believed that it is logically impossible for, literally nothing, to exist. If Einstein is right, and it is logically impossible for, literally nothing, to exist, it still is true that it is logically impossible to cross an infinity. And therefore, there must be a first cause, and that first cause is a logically necessary being, God. Logic sequence 2. It is logically impossible for empirical reality to violate logic. Therefore, if something is empirically the case, then it must necessarily also logically be the case. We have seen that God is empirically necessary being. Therefore, that means that God is also logically necessary being. 6. Conceptually necessary being. Logic sequence 1. We can conceive of a world where there is a necessary being. And that would be consistent with our empirical necessity world above, and with our logical necessity world above. Logic sequence 2. Alternatively, we can conceive of a world where there is no necessary being. But, that does not mean that such a world is logically possible. Not all conceivable worlds are logically possible worlds. And not all conceivable worlds are empirically possible worlds. E.g., we can think that we conceive of a world where there are married bachelors, or square circles. However, if we are not allowed to change definitions, there is no possible world where married bachelors, or square circles, can exist. Similarly, there is no possible world where an infinity can be crossed. And since there is no possible world where an infinity can be crossed, there is no possible world that can actually exist without a necessary first cause. And therefore, there is no possible world that can actually exist without a necessary being. Logic sequence 3. When you create a possible world, by imagining it, your mind is the necessary being for that world. If your mind did not exist, that imagined world would not exist. Similarly, when God creates this world, by imagining it into creation, God, mind, is the necessary being for this world, and all of physical reality, to exist. If God did not exist, this world, and all of physical reality, would not exist. 7. Can, literally nothing, exist? A. It is logically possible for there to be no matter-energy spacetime that exists. And the Big Bang is consistent with the view that none of those existed before the creation event. However, given God as necessary being, God ontologically pre-existed the Big Bang. B. However, is it logically possible for literally nothing to exist? Consider a possible world where literally nothing exists. In such a world, truth still exists. I.e., it is true that literally nothing exists. And, in such a world, logic still exists. E.g., the literally nothing cannot exist and not exist at the same time. So, this would indicate that it is logically impossible for literally nothing to exist. C. In addition, where would concepts like truth and logic exist? Concepts exist in minds. Truth exists in a mind. This indicates that an ultimate mind, i.e., God, has to exist as necessary being. Conclusion. God is necessary being.